Guys, how are you? I have moved from Carlo Vivari to Brno. This is the first video I do in Brno. I just settled in. I'm in the new flat. There's a bunk bed, but there's also another bed. It's a big room, it's a spacious big room. That's the way I like it. Kitchen's over there. It's just basically it's one room, so that's good. I like open spaces, good for creativity. You know, I'm thinking of moving some stuff around so that I have space to move around while I write and I get up, get a drink of water, because I drink a lot of water during the day just to keep my dehydration going. Most importantly, I've got the sun shining in my room. That's really important. It's kind of warm in here, so that's why they have 2 fans. I wanted to make this quick video and I just placed the camera on the shelf. That's why I'm standing up for this one, so there's a little bit more headspace or headroom. Maybe if I, what happens if I move this back? That's a little bit better, or is it? It's not, it's actually worse. What am I thinking? Okay, so I wanted to make a video. I've got Joao Gilberto playing in the background. I wanted to make a video about him because I just found out that he died. Now, he was old. He was an old man. I think he might have been in his 90s already, or maybe in his late 80s. He lived a good life, and but for those who don't know who Joao Gilberto is, he was really one of the greatest artists, musical minds of the 20th century, in my opinion. He really was. Brazilian musician, poet, guitarist, and the innovator of the bossa nova style. This bossa nova style was a style of music that really became popular in the 60s, but originated maybe in the late 50s. And Joao Gilberto was the innovator of this style of music that borrowed a lot from the samba, which was a type of music that came from the working class in Brazil and mixed a lot of tribal influences from the Brazilian heritage, and it had this really driving rhythm. But whereas samba was a little more forceful and more energetic, and kind of, the samba was whispered, it was more sophisticated, it was more defined by melodies, it was defined by, in the way Joao Gilberto did it, especially by a swinging acoustic guitar. And what was great about his early stuff was, well, you know, stuff throughout his career, was that you would hear his voice go in one direction and the rhythm of the guitar go another direction. This created such a sublime effect that it just blew people's minds, and didn't take long for some jazz people to kind of take up on it and start recording and start doing their experiments. And I think in the 60s, in the mid 60s, and now I wish I had notes in front of me, but this is just spontaneous and I just wanted to record this video. Stan Getz went over, grabbed Gilberto and said, "Hey buddy, you want to make a record together?" Joao Gilberto said, "Who the hell are you?" Because the thing about Gilberto was that he wasn't the easiest person to get along with. He was known for walking out of the concerts, for example, for just not liking the sound that was coming out of the speakers or the equipment or just the atmosphere in the room. He wanted things to be, he wanted to protect his status and himself, and he was known as a bit of an eccentric. But Stan Getz was kind of not the easiest person to get along with, but somehow it all worked, and I guess the tension translated into one of the greatest records of all time, in my opinion. It was just a sublime meeting of jazz and bossa nova. And the album that I'm referring to is Getz, Gilberto, and it also had Antonio Carlos Jobim. So and it included the best known bossa nova track of all time, The Girl from Ipanema, which is one of the best selling singles of all time. Of course, it's a duet with Astrid Gilberto, who was his girlfriend at the time. And I guess if anyone was to kind of, even people who aren't familiar with the existence of a genre of bossa nova, they will definitely know the song The Girl from Ipanema, you know, as soon as it kicks in. It's one of the most covered songs of all time and one of the best-selling singles of all time. And Gilberto and Getz was one of the best-selling jazz albums of all time too. So, but just back to Gilberto, what's so fascinating about him is that he had a great career, but he was very reserved. And as I said, he was an eccentric at the same time. He was difficult to get along with. He respected his own space, and he really looked after his output throughout his career. He was so protective that I think there was that there was something that had happened with EMI as they tried to put out some of his early works, and he heard them and he said, you're trying to tweak. He heard sounds in it that weren't there in the first place. Somehow I think that EMI tried to embellish him, tried to clean the sound, tried to make it a little more modern, a little more fresh. But as it happened, Gilberto was like, what are you doing? This is not my music. How dare you alter or tinker with an artist's work? So as a result, I think they actually stopped re-releasing his works or stopped having anything to do with him, and he actually took him to court. I'm not sure whether that whole incident was ever resolved, but on top of that, Gilberto, especially in the second part of his career, was very reserved. There's very few interviews with him, and so people that are aware of him and know him love him to bits. He's just one of the most fascinating people, artists of the 20th century. As I said, Antonio Carlos Jobim, Tom Jobim, and himself were the two really main bossa nova artists, and they're so beloved, and I mean, I love them so much. I mean, him. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you had Jorge Bem with his, or Jorge Bem. I wish I knew the pronunciation, but he was doing the more samba stuff, and then he went on to the Tropicalia that happened later. But you know, I'm talking about different things because it's hard to concentrate when you're talking about all these fantastic, amazing stuff that was happening at a time when really creativity was just blooming. Well, the beautiful thing about him was that, you know, when he was a kid, he always showed artistic disposition. And I think if I was to pick an ultimate track, a signature track of his beyond the obvious one, it would be Desafinado. Desafinado was released in his first album, which was in his first bossa nova album that actually included Beam Beam, which many would say is the first ever bossa nova track. But going back to Desafinado, it's an artist. I see that song in particular as an artist statement, and that statement is being out of tune, because that's what it translates to as in English. Desafinado translates as out of tune. So the song is about, basically, it's I think less than 2 minutes long, but it talks about this guy who, you know, gets a little critical of, he's a little hurt by this person who has approached him and said to him that he was singing out of tune. Or he was out of tune. I'm not sure right now whether, I think he does specify that it was singing, but it doesn't really matter, because in the end, you realize with the resolution of the track, the lyrics themselves, that he's not talking about just music. In fact, music is only a very small part of what he's talking about. He's talking about a bigger thing. The resolution is, he says, in criticizing me for being out of tune, you forgot that the people out of tune, you know, in the chest of the people who are out of tune, who sing out of tune, there's a heart that beats. And you don't really immediately notice it, but then after that, and after really finding out about his life, especially in the early part of his life, you realize that he's talking about life in general, especially life as he had decided to live it. He early in his life, he had decided that he wanted to be an artist. He wanted to fill his life with poetry, and in Brazil, that poetry and music have had a huge link, and still does to this day, I believe. But you know, you can't top what Joao Gilberto did, and not many people did in the 20th century. It was so worrying at the time, though, because I mean, if it's worrying now, if I mean, parents would react to their child wanting to be an artist, you know, later in life, and saying, you know, I'm going to be an artist, forget it, I'm not gonna get a job, I'm gonna just work on my music, we're focused on creating my own style, my own different things, you know, I want to make art, I want to live with art. Parents would probably take that as one of the worst things that their kids say, because that means not generating a regular income, a very uncertain future. If it means that today we live in privileged times, imagine what it could have meant at the time in, you know, in the 50s or even 40s, you know. it must have been terrible. So the father, the way that the father reacted was that he actually locked Gilberto up in a mental institution, and you know, eventually he got out, but that was as bad as it got. It's kind of symbolic then that happened, and then in the first album, that was his first pure artistic statement of his bossa nova music, he would one of the most famous songs would be the one that talks about it's okay to be out of tune. Actually, you're wrong, because you're not seeing the compassion. You don't have the compassion or the empathy for what I'm doing. So, you know, you're forgetting that in criticizing me, you're forgetting that there's a heart that beats. But the heart isn't just feelings, it's also emotion and passion. You know, the heart can represent a lot of things. It's a shame that, you know, very often in bossa nova, an international audience doesn't stop to realize that the lyrics themselves have such poetry and such sensibilities in them that, but it's hard, I guess, especially for an Anglophile audience, because obviously the songs are in Portuguese, and in fact, Portuguese doesn't really translate very well in English. There are some words, for example, saudade, that doesn't really translate into, it's not really translatable. I suppose the equivalent in English would be the blues, but it's actually, saudade has a little more to do with fatality, in the sense that it's missing something that you know you were going to miss somehow, or looking at something and feeling melancholic about it. You know, as you look at it, you know, I'm looking at this thing right now, right? I'm looking at it, it's right here, but then as I look at it, I can't really be happy about it because I know that I'm gonna lose it. You know, that's one part of saudade as I understand it. You know, it's just the feeling that everything that lives is born to disappear or end in some way. Yeah, so I think this was a roundup of thoughts of Joao Gilberto. I'm obviously very taken by it, but another thing that I'm taken by is that yes, he wasn't old. He lived a full life. He was one of the most respected artists of his time, internationally, globally recognized as knowledge and celebrated. And once again, losing a master leaves us with this incredible feeling of emptiness and void. Because as these people die, and we've seen it with David Bowie, we've seen it with all of these amazing people in all of the arts, you know, we keep seeing it. We've seen it with you know, people like Milos Forman. You know, we're in the Czech Republic, I thought I would name drop him. We've seen it all the time. Every time someone dies, you realize that it's not just the fact that we lost them, because these are people that may not have been as active as they had been in their heyday, but it's the realization not only of our own mortality, and that is always there, you know, that's always there. When someone dies, you're like, shit, you know, we're all gonna die. It's also that we realize that we don't have these people, and when we look at the lyrics of Joao Gilberto, Desafinado, that actually does preach compassion and empathy, especially in that resolution, by highlighting the fact that if you criticize someone that strongly, you know, you're forgetting that that person has feelings, has passions, has a life, has an emotion, has bloodstreams, has a heart, is alive, is a person in himself. That's interesting, because to me, art is the thing that actually puts us face to face with those things, puts us face to face with a reflection of ourselves, so that we can understand the world around it. Or it can just expose to us something that we see in our everyday life, but that we have never actually seen or understood, you know? So, we're missing that nowadays, because obviously I've said probably many times in the past videos, and I guess part of the reason for me even doing this YouTube channel is a way for me to understand in myself, why do we live in times when art is so mistreated? Why do we live in times when, but the evidence of it being mistreated is everywhere, you know? These tumultuous times that we live in are insane. I mean, what is happening? There is no compassion, there's no empathy. We are stuck in times when, this is something, when it's not easy to live, where kids, like, you know, I recently saw Let There Be Light by Marco Scop at the Carlo Vivar International Film Festival, and that was a film that basically exposed the fact that youths are somehow lured into joining youth paramilitary organizations instead of starting bands, you know. they developed this outrage early on, whereas before it was frustration, which they tried to voice by being creative, and they were encouraged to do so, or at least that's what we think. But I'm kind of suspicious of that too. Except nowadays we're really starting to see that we don't have these people anymore that would help us understand what was happening, that would help us understand, develop an empathy, a compassion. For example, right now in Brazil, politically, things are not going well. It's not a good time to be losing a figure like Joao Gilberto. But who is there to replace him? We've still got some great ones from the past, you know? We've still got Caetano Veloso going around. We've got a few people. But what I'm thinking is, man, we don't have a Joao Gilberto. Brazil doesn't have a Joao Gilberto. We as a human community, we don't have one. Think of Brexit. Could we not do with a figure like John Lennon during Brexit? I'm pretty sure that if John Lennon was around, Brexit wouldn't even be a thing, you know? This is why we needed art. I'm not saying that artists should be our politicians, or that we should, that they should decide what people do. But I'm talking about artists, by the way. I'm not talking about celebrities. There's a difference. Yes, an artist can be a celebrity, but an artist is different. It's a different person. And maybe I don't really want to get into that as well, because I feel like this video is going on forever. But this is basically the point. Joao Gilberto's death is reminding me that once again reminding me, by the way, that we don't have the people who can replace these greats, who actually came up with their own style of music, and that became mainstream, you know? In the 60s, there was nothing bigger, from the mid-60s, there was nothing greater internationally than bossa nova, you know? Nowadays, we may not even know what it means. Back then, it was huge. Nowadays, well, they don't play music in elevators anymore, which is a shame anyways. They should bring the music back. But, this should make us think, you know, if anything, if we're to take anything away from Joao Gilberto's death, there's not so much that he made it, because a lot of it is going to be like, oh, he was the one who made it, he was successful, he was creative, yes, he was a genius, but we kind of know that, yes, we should celebrate him for his genius, but we should also, we shouldn't celebrate him. A lot of people are going to just celebrate him because he's dead, and I guess, yes, I'm making a video on the occasion of his death, so I'm kind of joining in on that, but I would love for people to also awaken to the fact that Joao Gilberto had kind of stopped being hugely influential within 20 years of his career, right? Very few, I can't think of anyone who replaced him. And what he said poetically, you know? I can think of a lot of people who covered his music and who celebrated his music. I can think of a lot of interesting artists that came out. But there's no one that can replace him, and there was just the same way that there was no one who could replace David Bowie. I'm not saying replacing means a copycat that would, but seriously, man, who we got today? Who have we got today? Music. Let's think of the music world. Who have we got? I'm a big fan of Kanye West. I think he's a genius. We've got Kanye West. All right, but who else have we got? I mean, we've got a few players in jazz. I suppose Kamasi Washington is spreading a lot of positive vibes and spirituality into the world. There's a few. We got Esperanza Spalding. I'm not sure. I'm struggling, because if I think of really big acts that are from now, we still got Bruce Springsteen. There you go. But he's been around for ages. I'm talking about today. When Bruce Springsteen dies, because he's going to die, because we're all going to die, who do we have to replace Bruce Springsteen? Who have we got? Who's that red-haired kid from Ireland? He did Galway Girl. Actually, I grew up in Galway. It's the most hated song in Galway. Galway Girl. What's his name? The guy. Anyways, everyone knows who I'm talking about. He can't even replace. He would be more similar, I suppose, to Paul Simon, but he ain't replaced nobody. You know, we're gonna be left with him one day. What's he doing? But it's not just something that is related to music, it's related to the arts in general. I'm just disappointed I'm just disappointed, you know? I'm not even 30 yet, and I'm disappointed. I've got a lot to live, I think. And what am I gonna say? You know, even thinking back to like the last 10 years, there haven't really been a lot of people that I could identify as people who actually said something that was worth saying, you know? I'm not buying into all of these movements that come out that are kind of promoted by the media that are very generalistic and boring and stuff, you know? I'm more into, I got a more futurist kind of approach to life experience. I suppose individuality is still the best thing. I would like everyone to be free. A lot of people decide not to be free, but that's a different story. I mean, people are slaves of, everyone is a slave of something. But anyways, see, you know, I get into something and get into another thing. It's hard, man. I guess I just encounter too many things, and maybe this standing up thing is also making me kind of be like this, you know, a little bit more active and stuff. What I want to say to end it off is Joao Gilberto is, and always will be amazing. And his music just speaks to the heart. He was born in the Bahia region, and I have been wanting to go to Brazil for the longest time. Someone invite me for anything. You know, I want to go to Brazil. I want to go to Bahia. That's the place where I want to go to the most. Yes, I want to go to Rio as well, but Bahia. I can hear, well, I can't hear the music because it's playing now, but just the very mention of the word Brazil now has picked up such great connotations. Most of it music-wise. Black Orpheus, you know, come on. Long live o mito. Umito, I think that's how you say it. Long live Umito. Thank you, Joao. Thank you, Joao. Thank you so much. Think about it.